Hey everyone. Welcome. This is our last summer series or summer training series rather. So go ahead, put how you're feeling in the chat, where you're coming in from. I will do a quick intro, let you guys know what to expect, and the ground rules, but also want to thank you for attending this session. It's our very last one. There's been a lot of really, really wonderful conversations that we've been having, a lot of really dynamic people who have been joining, and like we've had conversations with so many of you. There've been regulars every single night, every single Wednesday. And so I sometimes get really excited when I see a name that I recognize, when I see conversations being had, and I really hope that you've learned a lot from this. We also are going to be sending out an email with all the information for some of our hosts. The videos will be on there, the presentations will be on there. I know a lot of y'all want to go back and revisit. Some of you may have missed a couple of sessions or just want a refresher. And so we will send that out to you sometime next week. Um, oh, hi, Ariane. Uh, um, she was one of our regulars, and so I'm really happy to, see her. And so, happy that you guys are all here. Very grateful that you guys have decided to spend your Wednesday nights with us for the last couple of weeks. We're going to talk about what it's like to run for office and work in this field as a Black woman. A lot of us are volunteers, or we've worked in campaigns or run for office in some capacity. And I think we can all agree that it's always been really hard to do this as a Black woman. Sometimes it's a lot. It's really thankless. It sometimes can be hard. Like we talked about last week, sometimes the campaigning in hard times, you feel kind of like your back's against the wall and you burn out. But there's also a lot of like beauty in it. And so we have two really dynamic speakers with us today, Brittany Claybrooks and Missayr Boker. They've both like have worked in politics. I think Brittany was a city council member, ran for office, and so they know their stuff and they're really dynamic and really great women to have this conversation with. So please utilize the chat, utilize the Q&A function. I really, really want to have this be a really dynamic conversation, especially to kick off our last session. So let's get started, and I'm going to let them in. Oh, there's Brittany. And I will see if I can move Missayr to the webinar too, if she has not gone in there already. Oh, I think Hey, Brittany, I think we're still waiting for Missayr to happen. Yeah, there's Missayr. Hi, y'all. So you guys can just introduce yourselves real quickly.
I'll go first. Hi, I'm Brittany Claybrooks. I am originally born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I am from Detroit, Michigan. However, I served as a city council member in the city of East Orange, New Jersey, where I was the youngest person in the history of that city to be elected. And I previously ran for Congress in a special election in New Jersey Congressional District 10. So there's a lot to be read there. And I most recently finished and completed a Democratic primary in the state of New Jersey, running for state assembly, where I placed third, and there were supposed to be two candidates. And so I almost unset a candidate who was not a Black man, who was previously a mayor and also an incumbent. And so I'm here to just share what I have, and I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to Higher Heights for all the work that you're doing. So Kyra, thank you for having us, and I look forward to speaking to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Missayr Boker. I am really excited to join you guys to have this conversation. A huge thank you to the Higher Heights team and Kyra for organizing all of this, but also making sure that you guys have, a lot of different individuals who have done a lot of different aspects of the work to be able to like be in conversation, hold space, and just kind of share the information that we have to the extent that it's helpful. I've been working in politics for probably longer than I should be, given how things keep trending in terms of the state of our country and also the state of our politics. But I came from the issue advocacy space, so working at a national advocacy organization for about 7 years, and then which was very political, like in nature, dealing with the candidates and overseeing their PAC and their endorsement processes. And then in the 2018 cycle, I was at the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, so the DSCC, where that was kind of our first opportunity. I won't even call it opportunity, but that was our first kind of Trump 1.0, right? Like, and so we had a Senate battleground with, at that point, 10 Senate Democratic incumbents who were running in states that Donald Trump had won. And we also started off that cycle with a big special election in the Senate race in Alabama, which is the seat that Doug Jones won. And so like we overperformed in that cycle, which was great. But also obviously the environment was tough. I worked on the former vice president's first presidential campaign as her national political director at HQ. We were in Baltimore at the time, overseeing the early states and Super Tuesday states. And when we dropped out of the campaign, when we dropped out of the race in December, then I went over to the House Campaign Committee at the DCCC, and I've been there for the last 3 cycles. One cycle I ran the DCCC's IE, their independent expenditure, and then most recently last cycle I was running all of the like campaign stuff on the coordinated side. So that's kind of now just recently coming off of a mayoral in New York City with a Black woman who is the speaker of the city council. And so I came in kind of late the last like 9 weeks to help them out. And yeah, so really glad to be here with you all and hopefully looking forward to a really engaging conversation.
So I'm gonna get started. So this question is for both of y'all. What pushed you to run and get into politics? And what fears did you have to silence to get started? So y'all can answer it however whoever wants to go first.
Hmm. I'll start since Brittany went first with the intro. I feel like I've always kind of been politically like interested, right? Like, and I think that started with like probably from college, I would say volunteering on local campaigns. I went to college in New England, in Rhode Island, and so there were a lot of opportunities while I was in undergrad to get really politically active. So I would say like that probably started off I think my last year, maybe in college or something like that. Don't quote me. There was the Lincoln Chafee, Sheldon Whitehouse Senate race primary, right? Like, and that was like a big deal. We hosted a debate on our campus. And so it opened up this door to really get active and really start to see what politics was all about in real time. And so I think that's what started it, volunteering, kind of getting a little bit more insight and visibility. I think the thing that probably made me pursue politics, right? Like once I tapped into that interest, it felt like a space that was, yes, there are a lot of us who are in important roles, whether it's, they're elected officials or organizers or whatever. But I think within the like kind of national infrastructure, it definitely felt like there was a ton of deficits, right? Like, and the people who were kind of running and responsible for running and winning these large campaigns that would really impact the trajectory of all of our lives, our families, and all of those things. It's like it was missing us, in my opinion. And so I think that's kind of what propelled me to keep going. I think the thing that I had to overcome is understanding and accepting that, I'm existing in a space that is not designed for us, right? Like, and so just because I haven't seen us in some of the roles that I now have occupied, right? Like, and been either the first Black woman or the first person of color to be in certain positions that I've held, just because like I haven't seen us in those roles, it doesn't mean that we don't belong in those roles. But that I really had to, I think, overcome that like for myself. And I think that took a bit. Um, yeah.
No, I I 100%, I'm sitting here nodding my head and smiling because I agree. I think for me, I've never really been more interested in the electoral politics more than I was being a government practitioner. And I joined from a space of understanding that who the people in those spaces can make or break my life. And as a person who grew up in Detroit, Michigan, having both of my parents being incarcerated, my mom doing 12 years throughout the course of her life, and my dad doing 14, a major bit and some other times. And then being in foster care and growing up on public assistance, I always kind of understood. I didn't really know the name for it, I have language for it, but I always understood that my life could be made better or worse depending on who decided to show up to work that day and how they decided to show up to work. So even when I got the opportunity to go to college and be educated and become, pursue being a doctor, because my original path was to be an OBGYN, a surgeon. I was always STEM inclined, and I was always just kind of that student. So I always wanted to just open up a women's health center, to be honest with you. And while I was at it, have some type of workforce development arm in the women's hospital in the abandoned hospital across the street from where I grew up. So it started there. And then as I began to take governmental classes, I began to understand that how I grew up in Detroit and urban Wayne County, Michigan was more intentional than it was a choice of ours. Because that's by the time I came along, you have a Black mayor, you have a Black congressperson, you have a Black council person, you have a Black state rep, you have a Black principal, you have a Black board of education person. So it's very easy to lose sight of what power is, and you just kind of get more of an individualized track until I began to understand how intentional this whole thing was. And so after that, I decided to not take the MCAT and move on in the life of public service, although I did not see that looking like me being the elected subject, more so working in governmental entities and spaces. By the time I got to grad school and it moved to East Orange, New Jersey, the chairman and folks in the Democratic Party had decided that there was a young lady who was operating in the party from a volunteer space that would make a great councilwoman. And so I learned over time that some of us are asked to be in the space, and you can tell God what you want to do and be behind the scenes and just be really good at your job, as I have become an urban planner. And then he'll move you in other spaces where you have to step up. I think the biggest fear, because I did have to silence a lot of them, as I explained to you my background, the statistics around women who have my lived experience, because we're in this conversation about what's acceptable Black and what's not, is very low, probably between 3 to 5%. And so, and I began to understand that once I got an establishment and was a part of the Black Caucus movement and all that as a fellow, I began to understand that lived experience was a very important part of leadership, especially depending on where you're serving and if you're serving in an underserved area. And so two distinct fears that I had to get over, one of them being that, I belonged in this space, even if the people who looked like me did not share my lived experience, but they were oftentimes serving people who did. And so I had to get over that conversation around what's respectable and what's not, because the skill set that I had gained and I had hid behind was necessary at the moment. And the more I talked, the more I spoke to people, the more I realized that part. And then finally, the other fear was as I began to progress in politics, because if you look up my name, it is synonymous with burning down systems that have kept candidates away from running, and this idea of consolidated power when you're talking about party lines and party politics, which we'll get into later. I had to get over the fear of what I might professionally lose or personally lose, because politics is not funny, it's not a game, and people's livelihoods really are affected based on how they enter the space and whether they've been anointed to be in the space or not. And I just felt this time to be there to be too much at stake at this time in politics and in public service and in our communities to worry about it. And so as a woman who was young with no kids and just a little bit to protect, I decided to put it all on the line for the sake of serving people and serving people from what I believed would be the right way and integrity over politics.
Thank you. Those are both really great answers. Feels weird. You know what I mean? And so kind of going on to like you guys have been very real about like why you started and your fears. What are some unspoken realities about being a Black woman in politics that people don't talk about enough? I know we've kind of like you've hinted at like, fitting into like that like CBC label and kind of like statistically and statistic stuff. And then Misa, you kind of hit on there's not a lot of like Black faces in certain rooms. And so what are some more like unspoken realities that I think all three of us have probably faced. But what are some that like that come to mind for y'all?
Um, I think the first one I would say is accepting that the way we, accepting that a lot of times, and this is just my experience, I'm not making kind of generalizations, but there's a lot of, I think, people that I work with and around who the way they approach politics, campaigns, electoral work, right? Like what it takes to win, what it means to communicate with all the different, right, like factions of the electorate that we have to win over. They see that through a prism of like this country as they want it to be, not this country as it is. And I think that's one of the places where I've always seen tension, right? Like because sometimes how they think about strategy or what they see as the strategic imperatives, it's according to the world as they want it to be, right? Like not the world as it is. And I think the world as it is requires a different approach to certain things or a different tactical solution to certain strategic problems. So that's the first one I would say I think that shows up in the aspect of doing the work for sure. The other thing that I'll say is like you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? Like I am a person who's you know, I'm a direct communicator. I don't yell. My voice stays how it stays. I'm not, you know, mad or happy. Like it's not any of that. It's not like a ton of like emotion about like things that are about the work, but I communicate directly. And I think a lot of white people have a problem with Black women who communicate directly and they see that as being overly confident, being arrogant, being, not using 30 words to say a thing that I can say in 10 words, right? And so I think that is another thing in my experience that folks have a hard time grappling with, but it's just the reality of, I think sometimes who we are, not saying all Black women communicate directly, but if you are a direct communicator like me, my experience is that sometimes that like people want you to use a lot of words, additional words to say a thing that does not require all those words, right? Like you have to kind of like flatter your colleagues and then you tell them the thing and then it's like a sandwich, right? Like it's like, no. So I think that's the other thing. The third thing that I will say is that people still don't know people still don't understand our communities. And I think that's another tension point.
I agree 1000%. I don't really have much to add to it. I come from a space of I think the most non-Black space I have been in was just during my grad school career as a young leader at New York University, and then following that, being the North Jersey political director for Andy Kim, who's now a senator. And I won't single out moments in either of those times, but what I will say is that it's very true that our direct style of communication is something that is very it's something that I don't want to say is not necessary because people will make you feel like it's not necessary. They'll say you are not following the rules or you're a little harsh and all of that stuff. And I think even in spaces where people have adopted the performative culture, because that's a culture thing in politics where if you have not adopted this very establishmenty sort of mindset, even in Black spaces, you kind of are outcasted because people are moving from a place of performance. And that for me was the biggest challenge because right now, I believe, particularly our generation believes that people are called to solve more problems. I think we are beyond the stage of just being happy to be here. And as a person whose natural skill set is math, science, urban planning, land use, or all of that stuff, my natural way of being is just not performative because there's a problem, it has to be solved. If you are in the field and you're doing field work in electoral politics, there is a gap in how many people you need to turn out and vote, and there is what we do to get there. It's that simple. So when like you said, Misa, when we're talking to people, it's not anything towards you, but I come in here understanding that the community that I serve not only is trusting me to communicate with you directly and ask for what we want, but I find it to be necessary because there are a bunch of different problems that are going unsolved because we're playing this game of performance. So that is one of the things that has made me like just I can't even I don't think my nails long enough to grab at the air to even talk about how mad I get with that part. But also, I think the other unspoken rule is that building on the idea of performative based politics over purpose driven politics or purpose driven service, I think the other unspoken rule is how we are personally policed and how we personally show up. So I've had people who have just adopted this business or this space as a way of life to talk to me about where I should be partying, how I should be showing up, whether or not I'm palatable beyond what they thought I would be, or am I performing based on how they felt like I would move? And I would say, number one, I'm a woman of God, and I also was somebody's child, and I come from an urban environment, and I had an identity before I decided to run for office, and so respectfully, this is not it's not all it is to me, right? And so I have a value system that runs a little deeper than this. And there's this unspoken rule or expectation that it has to become a lifestyle. And I think honestly, that has produced a lot of bitterness among women who have been in it for a long time. And so they gatekeep because it's about keeping their power. I believe that it's created a lot of emotionally unhealthy people. And I believe it has created a field of narcissism that has been more focused on seizing little parts of power than getting the work done. And as I have come in a generation where we need to show up the best we can because of the work that has been done that by the women that come before us, women died so that I can show up healthy, and women died so that I can show up here and be my whole self with a half sleeve of tattoos, but with education and a pulse on this community that you cannot take from me. And so whether you are Black and you're in the way because you've adopted that and you're surviving white supremacy in a different way than I am, or whether you're white and you're in the way, and ultimately your way of being has infiltrated the way we survive this society, either of you, if you're in the way, you will move out of the way, whether I win or not, because that's what this is about. It's about impact and overpower. And I think a lot of us are pushing towards that direction, but it's some friction. And some of us are trying to exist in this space, in our whole authentic selves, that I think is going to take some time, but we here and it ain't nothing you can do about us.
Yeah, all of it. Especially the direct communication thing. I have like horror stories about how that goes down. And we have a question from someone, says anonymous attendee, so they're in the chat. But they said, any tips for handling men in positions of power or authority who do not take us seriously or sexualize us? She said Black men, but then she went back and said like men in general, but she's found those challenges from Black men specifically. Yeah, that's again, I can write a book, but um it's I'd love to hear from y'all. And then there's someone who had their hand raised. And they can LaShonda, can you put your question in the chat if possible?
Want to write the book on the Zoom call, or do we want to?
Yeah, so like we could write the book now or we can come back and do it later.
Go ahead,
Um
Lisa. I'll take a step back here.
Okay. I'll break this up into two. It's any advice for men, so not specifically Black men, but men not taking us seriously and men who over sexualize us. Do I have that right, Kyra?
Yeah, like how to handle that, like while we're in this field. I know I've experienced like being in a room with black men and white men who look at me like I'm like 5 years old when I try to like assert myself. Or like who, think they can be a little grabby when I'm like, no, please do not hug me. I don't want that. And so just like how do we as black women in this field um handle that, without like putting like a red X on our back?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I'll say is that, like, I think the first caveat to what I'm about to say is that, like, it's it's relative to me, Misa, right? Like dealing with those situations. And I say that because we don't all rightfully, right? Like we're all not the same in spite of conventional wisdom. We don't have the same personality. We have different boundaries. We have different comfort zones. So that just kind of establishing that caveat, which I know that we all know. But, I think the first part on people not taking us seriously, the way that I have handled that, and then I'll get to kind of my advice more broadly. The way that I have handled that is that I've tried to be a person who takes seriously the responsibility to do my homework and show up prepared and not be a person, which I see all the time, a lot of times from uh, white men and then actually just like men. They just suck all the oxygen out of the room, right? Like you're in a meeting and it's just like they say something because they feel like they have to say something. If they don't say something, then like God forbid, right? And so I try to be a person who, I do my homework, I show up prepared. I typically have a theory of the case or a thought or a perspective on something, and I try to be the person who, when I open my mouth and when I say something, it's something that needs to be said, right? Like it's registering a thing that is significant to either move us or redirect us or whatever, right? Like, and so I think that's the thing that I've tried to do, because I also just, I think, understood that that was going to be one of the obstacles, right? Like the gap that I was talking about, the deficit I was talking about is by design, right? Like it's not because we can't do some of these things, it's because certain people want to co-opt, right? Like power, and want to be the only ones in certain decision-making spaces. So it's by design. And so I understood that like I have to take seriously the fact that like I didn't create these rules, but when I say something, when I open my mouth, it is going to command the respect or command, because I think it like, built over time, but like command, it is going to be worth listening to. And that's kind of how that's what's been kind of one of my principles, that I think has worked out. I think the advice generally that I will just give to anyone and everyone is, again, be a person who you're on your shit, right? Like you know what you're talking about, and when you open your mouth to say something, like it is a real something. Because in a midst of people who say a lot of words but don't actually communicate anything, right? Like don't actually make a point, don't actually serve a purpose in furthering the work. There are a lot of distinctions between the people who, when they use that time and their voice to register something, to say something, it is something of significance. And so just like, know your stuff, do your homework, be well studied, like, and so I think naturally that then will lead to, when you say things, right? Like people will stop and listen. It won't be immediate, but I think the more and more you do that and become a person who like says the thing that no one else is saying, or says the thing that like, you know, surfaces a thing that they're not even thinking about, right? Like then you become the person that like when you say something, everyone's like, oh, wait, what? Okay. Right. Like I had a younger than me, and Latina who worked for a person that worked for me. So like one of my directors, she worked in on his team, and she asked me one time, she said, how do I get male consultants to take me seriously? Right? Like when we're on these calls having these conversations about strategy. And she was like, I speak very softly. So, I think sometimes they say they can't hear me. And so I think I just need to speak louder and speak louder. And I was like, okay, I think that's an interesting solution. I was like, it's not that they can't hear you. I think it's that they don't want to hear you. Because if they heard something that they thought was worth listening to, I think what you would get, right, like is, oh wait, what did you say? Right? Like, or can you repeat that again? Right? Like, and so just try, and I say this as someone who had seen that person on calls, right? Like show up on calls, whatever. And so I had a little bit more insight into her specifically, but I said it's not your volume, right? Like don't solve for your volume, right? Like solve for when you show up on the calls, right? Like whatever the thing is that you're saying, just make sure you've done your homework and you're saying the thing of substance, right? Like, and I think that if you continue to do that, I think that helps. Again, it won't solve the problem entirely, but I think that helps. And I only say that because I think a lot of times we like spend a lot of time, I've done it, trying to figure out different creative ways to solve for a thing that I have found is actually that I approach much more like I approach in a much more simplified way. And that doesn't mean everybody will change. That doesn't mean even if you're saying all the substantive things that there are not men who will, try to undermine you or not take you seriously because of the threat that you pose to them and their positioning. But it does mean I think that like for the people who are just there are a lot more people who will take that and who will hear that and who I think will start to view you in a certain way and start to listen because they have more to gain than lose by listening to you, frankly, than the ones who just like they're never going to listen to you because they don't want to. And it has nothing to do with what you say. And I think we just have to make the distinctions between those people. On the over sexualized, again, back to me being a direct communicator, I think my style is such that there are certain things that I can anticipate and I make adjustments for them. So for example, if I don't know, I spent a lot of time dealing with other operatives and people who are at other like allied organizations, people who are on the official side in government, so like chiefs and admin officials and all of that, and consultants, right? Like a lot of whom are male and a lot of whom are white and male. Um, and I think the way, if I don't have a relationship with you, if we are not friends, if we are not, right, like if we're getting together to talk about work, we're getting together for coffee or we're getting together for lunch. We're not getting together for a drink, right? Like, and so on the front end, those are some of the things because I think sometimes like environments can also embolden people. White men are bold, so they're gonna take every opportunity. And so I think I start by, all right, some of these situations warrant us having coffee, right? Like for 45 minutes, it warrants us having lunch because there's a longer conversation. It is not a drinks situation in the evening or late at night, right? Like that's not it. And so I think that's one. Two, I think just like establishing your boundaries and we have to be comfortable with the fact that like if you tell like that this is not news to us, right? Like if you tell a man, to not invade your space, not invade your privacy or to not touch you in a certain way or to not, right? Like cuz they don't know you like that somehow if someone is in a position that they will try to, you know, they will feel a way and then make you, right? Like if they're in a position where they can determine outcomes relative to you, or if they're your boss, or if they're a consultant who might get you here, there, whatever, right? Like they might feel a way about that, and that might restrict the opportunities that they decide to offer you or facilitate for you. And all of that has to be okay, right? Like because the only alternative is to be uncomfortable to get to an end goal and that'll never make us feel okay. And so I think some of it is just like simply accepting that you have to establish boundaries. I think that starts with some of the interactions. Politics is good for there's a lot of socializing, right? And I think that's where a lot of from my experience, that's where a lot in the experience that I know of other Black women, right? Like and women in general, that's where a lot of the introductions, the advances come from is in these spaces where drinks and dinner and whatever and it feels a little looser. And so if you cut some of that off on the front end and try to like make it as daylight, lots of people, not alcohol because we don't know each other, right? Like I think some of that can limit those.
Yeah, I agree because I didn't hear anything that I would add to other than just the aspect of being actually elected in the space and having to transition my life from my evenings belonging to me versus having to be the target or the subject of whatever event at that moment or whatever the moment was calling for me to be present, and a part of the work that I needed to do, where I had to be at the fundraiser, I had to be at insert thing after 7 o'clock, as the person who really valued that part of my life and my role the least. Um, for me, it was about doing the inner work of permission giving, because I have, and sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves, because we do exist in a society with isms that are bigger than us, and sexism is one of them, and patriarchy is another one of those things. And I had to have a conversation with myself as I was younger and still developing in this space in my 20s and early 30s, that because I have a healthy relationship with my father, because I have a healthy relationship with my brothers, because I have a healthy relationship with the people who I've been partnered with who are also in this business or in politics, I had to have a conversation or a realization of, those are the people who you have given permission or feel some type of obligation to cover, protect, and be in your space. When you are operating from the space of public service and professionalism, those are men who you have not given permission. So when I'm in the space with these folks, I don't care about what you did on the weekend. I'm not one of those people you have to flatter at the meeting by talking about your kids and your wife and all of that. So I wasn't performative in that way. I am not the person, even if I'm out at night, I am very clear that regardless of how I am in this space, or who I'm here with, or what I'm doing, you do not have permission to ask me anything. And I would remind somebody of that by voice. So if you saw me after 9 o'clock, or you saw me at the conference and I'm at the party where I have to rub elbows and make everybody feel great, if you stepped out of line, then I would be the person to remind you. If you thought it was okay to ask me about the person that I'm dating who also is public facing, then it's my job to remind you to call me. If you want to talk to me about the code enforcement changes, if you want to talk to me about the land use changes we're about to make, if you want to talk to me about your project that is up for, approval, if you want to talk to me about any of those things, and this is not the space to do that, you can see me in my office hours on Tuesday between 4:30 and 6 p.m. Because I also have a full-time job and I'm an urban planner and I take that seriously. So I was not a social politician, because I took both my work in the daytime and my political position very seriously. The other way in which men would try to diminish me, like I said, I was in unapologetic relationships with people who were public facing. And so people would try to minimize you by trying to talk about that, or try to have you hide your legacy, or hide your leadership, or hide whatever it is you're doing behind those things, or try to figure out who you are as a daughter, a mom, and auntie, versus the person who's here, who, whether you like it or not, has the power to say yes or no to whatever it is you're trying to push through. And I took that very seriously. And I don't care if I'm wearing a dress today, because I was very clear I did not want to be some masculine figure to command power, because that's not who I am. So sometimes people thought that that meant I was more inviting, and then they soon find out that that was not the case. And but I had to have a real conversation with myself about permission giving, and whether or not I was going to give myself permission to command that kind of space as a person who had a very healthy relationship with male leadership and covering in my personal life. And also, I think that that's something that I would add to that, because it's there's too much conversation about who we are as women versus who we are as professionals, and I find that not to be the same dynamic for men who occupy spaces and positions of power. And I've always been very annoyed by it. And so, as much as people were radically interested in me, I was radically deterring them from that interest. And it may have rubbed people the wrong way, but I didn't care. And I didn't care what your position was. I I would let you know very quickly, what does this have to do with my role as a counselor? What does this have to do with this conversation we're having about whether you're going to donate to me your little $100 or not?
Sound,
Seriously.
yeah, that like that boundary is important. It just is. So thank you for those great answers. Yeah. And so LaShonda had a question about fundraising as a Black woman and Black women who embrace patriarchy. And I'm gonna add that to a question that I'd already sent over. And it says, What kind of challenges do you face on the trail or in your work as a Black woman with fundraising, media, and party politics, especially when there are people who look like us who kind of fall into like that patriarchal structure or that white supremacy structure? I know in my experience, in the past, like I've worked with like other people who looked like me who fell right into like that white supremacist framework. And it was really isolating to try to work with them or try to connect with them because it's kind of that whole there's only one of us who can be in the room mentality instead of it being like we should all they're all against us, we should be working together. And so how do we navigate things like fundraising or party politics when we're dealing with people who again look like us but embrace those systems that keep us down?
Yeah, I will answer that. Just because I will add the anti-establishment sort of work that happened in New Jersey to this. So when I was in New Jersey, I served as right after coming off of one term as a councilwoman, which was chaotic to begin with because I was, not endorsed by the party after that. And if anybody wants to contact me directly to find out more about that, I'd be glad to. After my term as councilwoman, and the party decided that they would not endorse me for a bunch of different reasons. Again, we talked about fearing what we might lose as a result of standing up for what's right and still being a problem solver and a person with receipts and all of that. Politics sometimes is about power for a lot of folks that are in the establishment-based party side of it. And so sometimes in order to show that power, they will remove their support from you, especially in a state like New Jersey. So as I moved on, I began to work on Andy Kim's campaign, or Senator Andy Kim's campaign, which was a clear, stark difference from what we were seeing. And our work was in getting rid of this county line ballot system that was a big part, and it was a big thing, and it was a big barrier to people running without party support and winning or having a fair shot at winning. And one of the biggest issues that I had to learn to do was first have grace for people like that, because number one, and are also most of the people in the establishment were Black people who had adopted all these problematic ways of being. And so I kind of felt like I was standing alone in some respects, or secretly getting support like the Underground Railroad, because folks were worried about their jobs and their survival and all this other unspoken stuff that people act like they're afraid to talk about. And I'm not, because it's a thing. One of the things I had to learn to do was develop a sense of grace for all people who look like me in this space, because we are all surviving a system that was not built for us, as Missayr talked about previously. So once I realized that you acting the way you are acting is your way of surviving white supremacy and this systematic thing that was not set up for us, and you're doing that from a space of protecting your own spot and protecting your space and protecting what you think you have and the impact that you want to have long term, which is a way of surviving. And the way I'm surviving it is collectivity and shared vision and shared leadership, and this push to be genuine and authentic and non-performative in the space, as well as, quite frankly, qualified, because I can't tell you how many people who get out there and just have this, political hokey pokey struggle little conversation in the community and go to a couple churches and now they elected, right? I don't even want to go there, because that's another problem. As a recipient of that from a poor background, that's another issue. But I've learned to develop a sense of grace there, and then finally have conversations, and then try to build a movement where people felt safe coming on this side, so we had more representation. That was so much of what the movement I was a part of in New Jersey was about, because without diversity in thought, and without diversity in spaces that people can find safe, the Democratic Party in particular has felt very safe with our votes. And to not be establishment in Democrat meant that you weren't Democratic at all. And I found that to be couldn't be the furthest from the truth. And for those of us who understand the consequences of poor leadership, I come from Detroit. We were the first major city to go bankrupt, and we were made an example out of as a city with majority Black leadership. And we weren't doing nothing more or less corrupt than any other government, right? So it's just, this is what happens when Black people try to take advantage of those kinds of games, and then we suffer as a community. I think for me, it's just inviting more people to the table and having my leadership, or having me be in that space from a place of advantage or power or whatever, help to move other spaces forward that invite more people in. So you have different packs or even higher heights, you all are doing great work to allow people to exist in a space where you don't have to be the only one. Because in 2025, that just one, quite frankly, shouldn't be the case. That's the first thing. And number two, um, it I think we are needing more people from our generation or people who wouldn't otherwise believe that they belong in politics in the space to kind of clear some of that up. Because I believe that's just a culture thing in politics. And I believe that people are doing that to survive a space, as Missayr said, just wasn't built for us. And so those folks are surviving just like us. They just have a different way of doing it. And unfortunately, it's probably the most problematic way, as we need more fighting, problem solving people at the table.
Thank you. Uh, sorry. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I was trying not to subject y'all to me messing with my computer and whatnot. Um, when I actually, and Kyra, this is your doing, so I'm sure this is why you did it. But I think it's so good that like Brittany and I, the balance between like operative, right? Like operative kind of singularly, and like also having the elected, what it means to actually be a candidate and experience it from that lens too, even though, right, like I work with a lot of candidates, but like, and I would agree with all of that. I think from my vantage point, I think unfortunately, and I think this past cycle, a lot came out of, in very big races, where that dynamic was also true. And I think it's unfortunate that, our politics, our campaigns, our electoral infrastructure and system is in such a place that like Black people have to operate from such a place of scarcity that we're working against ourselves, right? Like that we see it as such a zero-sum game that it's like if I'm in, right, like in order to preserve my ability to have white validation, right? Like, and to be the Black person that white people see as worthy of doing the things, that means it can only be me, right? Like, because then otherwise, that whole thing is messed up. And it's unfortunate, but again, these are systems that we didn't design, but it's also when we actively participate in them, I think it really is damaging and dangerous, frankly. One of the things that I one of the things that and I think it's worth saying that like I come to the things which I think has been helpful for me, right? Like coming to the positions I've been in is not, I don't think there's any benefit when all we've had is white men running IEs and, entire 62 battlefield, hard coordinated sides and being in control of the money. And if that's all we've had, right? Like, and then when I'm in a position where, I'm the one doing that, right? Like, and it's the first of us, but also the first of people color doing these jobs. I don't come at my work from a place of maintaining status quo. If the status quo deserves to be maintained, sure, right? But I don't start from that place. And I think it has really served me well. I always start from a place of, you don't need Missayr if all I'm going to do is act like a mediocre white man. You don't need me, right? Like, because why do you have me, right? Like, you could just go get a mediocre white man, right? Like, instead of you trying to have me to perform as one. And I know sometimes that is probably the goal. It just never ends up working that way because that's just not who I am, right? Like, correct, correct, or self-hating Candace Owens, that's right, right? And so I have tried to to lead by example sounds a little bit like I'm not self-important, like I'm truly not, but I think I've tried to make decisions, right, to show people that it's not a binary option. It's not a, can I make progress and can I change the people who are let in, right? Like, and push out some of the people who've been in for far too long, frankly. Can I make some of these decisions to change how we do things, right? Like without feeling like I'm costing myself my job, right? Like if it costs me the job, I think then it costs me the job. But I think in a way, like frankly, like relationships are a big part of the work that we do. And I think like I've tried to be a person who has built up and demonstrated the credibility, and also like the way I work is and the way I approach some of these things. It's like you hire me because I'm me, right? Like you might think you're hiring me because you want to say that you have diversity, right? Like, and great, there's a premium on the fact that I'm a Black woman. There's a premium on the fact that, you know, I'm a African immigrant, a West African immigrant, right? Like I wasn't born in this country. We immigrated from Liberia. And so, yeah, there's a premium, all of that. That's what you get on top, right? Like, but what you get, right, like, is someone who is strategically sound, right? Like, and tactically proficient. And that's what you get. And that the other stuff is a premium. Sure, it's helpful. But so I've tried to be the person that, like, okay, when I'm making these decisions, when I'm controlling the budgets, when I'm in charge of, do we say yes, no, or maybe, you know, to things and consultants or whatever, I always try to identify where I'm going to make change. Like, where is it worth demonstrating for people and modeling, right? Like that you can do it. We can still be us and do it in a way that also allows some of us to come in who have experienced such barriers to entry, right? Like, and what that has done though is it pisses the white men off who are used to the hamster wheel of just always getting, always getting. And this shows up, I think the place it shows up the most for me is with like the consultants, because that's where the money is, right? Who's getting the contracts, who's doing the what, and it's been a certain way for a long time, right? Like, and firms that look a certain way have certain, right? Like we have not been in that space making a lot of money. And so you got to push people out to bring people in. And those are some of the places, that's one of the places where I've been like, that's where like it's one of the places where I have actively decided that like, oh no, this is not going to be it. Now, white men think they can yell at me or cuss me out because they're not getting a contract. But at the end of the day, I can tell you why I got to the decisions that I got to. And also, I'm not going back and forth with you about a thing that's like the decision is the decision. And I think, unfortunately for them, what they've started to learn is that you're going to end up back before me for something, right? And so if you think you can talk to me a certain way because you don't get the outcome that you want because you feel so entitled, you're gonna have to end up before me again for something else that you want. And then here we are again, right? So I think it's unfortunate that that's where we are, but I think, you know, our responsibility, all we can do for those of us who are in certain positions is try to model what it looks like to also be like of the community before each other, to help each other and to not move through this thing like, you know, it's us or it's me or Kyra, right? Like if I get a thing, then like Kyra can't get a thing, or if I like that's not true, right? Like white people make space for white people all the time. Why can't we?
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing to that because I remember in 2018 where I had to ask, and I know we're getting low on time, but it brought up a moment where I was young and didn't understand what I was doing, but remember being just so that affirmed and validated by my Black woman boss, who I've only worked for Black women. All my bosses have been Black women except two in my entire professional life. I believe that's a privilege. And I remember being at CBC and I stood before members of Congress in a panel and said, "Hey, my name is Brittany Claybrooks and I work for such and such firm, right, who is only getting urban outreach contracts. And every time we have to give our report, and the whole firm was there. We were all at CBC, and I said, every time we have to give our report, we are always more efficient. We're always, you know, responding because this is a field. I was in a field firm. We're always responding to the needs of canvassers differently. People are always coming to work for us, and I have found a trend because at that time I was just a girl in grad school studying numbers. I'm noticing a trend where all of our contracts are coming in. We're always getting a small piece of the campaign. And it's always urban outreach and it's always Black outreach. And then we get to show up and say, hey, we helped produce a thing. Where are our contracts for the entire field program? Where are the contracts for us to do all of it statewide when you're running for a federal office, particularly senator? And I remember after that, I remember my boss just being so deeply grateful that I asked it. And I'm just like, what did I do? I just asked the question because I didn't understand the weight of what I was doing at the time as a junior associate. I just had the question. And so that's where you stop asking for permission to just get up there and do what you need to do. And we would later on get a senatorial contract to do the statewide field. And I remember having to build this like statewide call system, which was new at the time in New Jersey. And they had predicted a 7-point lead of this candidate because of all his drama and corruption, and that was starting to talk. And then we produced a nearly 10-point lead against what they had predicted. And in my mind, I remember walking away, deciding I would never do field again, more so. But I remember going back to grad school the next semester feeling like Black women can do anything. And you see what happens when we ask for what we want and we take our rightful place, and we will always produce. Don't take advantage of that. But it was solidifying for me that standing in our truth in that moment was important. And so I just wanted to add that because Missayr, you really brought that point home, and we are always left out of conversations where the money is. And that's the unfortunate part about this business.
And I think like you brought up, just say two things to what Brittany brought up, because I think these are really good points. And part of what I was talking about with the consultant thing is like, you know, shifting from consultants doing specialty media, right? Like ads for Black folks, Latino folks, whatever have you, to like, no, they can do the general market, right? Like as long as they have the capacity, the technical ability to make good ads, right? Like they can do the general market. Because here's the thing. The white firms that are doing the general market media, right? Like general market is not just white people, right? Like Black people are seeing those ads because they're also in the district, right? Like a white majority district with a 20% Black population, right? Like we have in if you look at even New York for Nassau County, right? Like very competitive race, right? A 20% Black population, the Black folks are in the general market. They're watching the TV ads. It's just that you also have to do things that are more speaking to them and the specific things they care about in ways that are culturally relevant and resonant, right? Like so it's not like general market means just white folks, right? And so it's shifting that, you know, oh, they can do the thing that is about speaking to them, to their people, right? Like that's what they should do. Right. Like, and then white folks can do the thing that's about speaking to everybody. And it's like, no, some of that is like, no, they can speak to everybody. And they can speak to everybody better because if we see the fragmentation in our coalition, right? Like white non-college people, we're losing them. Men, we're losing them. Voters of color, we're losing them, right? Like, and so in a lot of ways, we have a cultural disconnect as a party with the electorate. And speaking to them in ways that sound performative, elitist, X, Y, and Z is actually unhelpful. And we actually need people who understand how to appeal and connect to people through advertisement or mail or communicating information in a way that's actually going to land. And then the second thing that I'll say, which I think is the place where I extend grace for the dynamic of like, you know, Black folks working against each other. I I think there's still a lot of work to do for how we give each other the game, right? Because there are some Black folks that I know, and I'll say there's one person specifically that's coming to mind who I think, had a really hard time with this last cycle. There are some Black folks we know who like their entry into politics has been facilitated by white people, right? And again, so has mine in a lot of ways. Like I've worked in mostly white spaces, organization, like, the committee structure is not that, right? And so is mine. But they owe kind of their entrance to white folks, and white folks are not going to tell you how you need to exist as a Black person in the context of electoral politics relative to other Black folks. So if you are a Black person in this business and the only people that are your people who you talk to, who you get guidance from, who you give business to are white folks, then you're never going to understand what it means like for us to be in solidarity, even if we're in different spaces of the work. So I think there is a lot of work to do to people who want to get in politics. Like I always find time, like anybody who's working for me is always annoyed by this, but like, people reach out and they want to do coffee. And like, if I have like an assistant or coordinator or something, they'll be like, okay, a 30-minute coffee, Missayr, I booked it with that person. And it's like, no, it's an hour, right? Like, because 30 minutes is not enough time to talk to someone about what this is, to give them advice, to give them guidance, to understand what they like and hate about this, to help direct them in the best way or connect them to the right people, right? And so it's just we have to set aside time to really like get with people outside of the like wheeling and dealing and like give people the game of how to do this. Because I think that is some of it too. Like people who operate that way, sometimes they really don't have the game because it's only white people that they owe their careers to.
Wow. Um, thank you so much. And we're a little over time. Do you have time for one more
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
It's a
I'm
quick
good.
one.
Sorry, I don't want to speak for you, Brittany.
Oh, do you have time for one more question, Brittany?
I do have time for all the questions.
I know.
I set my night.
Also, is black folks, so like to be clear, I was like,
Yeah.
we're doing it for an
I
hour,
hold
but
my night aside. So however many
right,
people, as much time as you have, Kyra, that's how much time I have.
right.
I'm gonna have time for one more to let everyone have their day back. But kind of like a little more of a positive note. What do you advice do you have to give to Black women who are watching this or watching the news and they kind of are doubting if they want to get into this field, whether it's they want to run for office, they want to be an organizer, they want to work in politics, but they're like doubting themselves. Like what advice would you give to them?
So I would um, say that this, and I've said this to Black women all this summer when I'm supposed to be on a strategic rest and all this stuff. Sometimes somehow my heart keeps coming back. And so I'm trying to find a healthier way to do that these days. But I do take time to talk to women, and what I tell them is that the skill set that you have is exactly what's missing. There are some general traditional rules around this, and you've heard Missayr and I float terms around and all that. And I wish I can come back for a part two to talk about
Oh yeah.
fundraising and all of the other stuff and what it takes to do that, both to win and as a person who's won and as a person who's also had some impact sort of victories happen in my favor where I didn't win, but people are like on the edge of their seat, like what's happening. Um, I'd say that whatever you have is missing, and there are general rules to this. And you heard us bounce all that stuff around tonight just because we're in the space. But I want women who are thinking about it for the first time to recognize that we are exactly in the moment where performative based politics is problematic for us. And as we move towards or back towards the purpose of politics, why people get involved, why it's important for different types of folks to get involved, why no matter if you're upper middle class or lower, the other side is returning us all to one group because they're minimizing our very existence in this country. You have to know that if you're loud and proud and extroverted, you belong in the space. And if you are much more analytical and a little bit more laid back and a little bit more problem solving, and you won't show up as happy to talk about your PTA meetings, and you're not going to be smiling, and you're not going to be doing all of that. I was one of those people. You still have something to offer to this space as long as the problem you intended to solve is being talked about, addressed, or you've added it to the space, or you're keeping the reasons why, which should be people, not you, but people, the reasons why you're doing this at the forefront. And that's something that I find, the fact that this moment is calling for that, it's inviting more women to the space, women who are doctors and STEM-based folks and researchers and all these fields that people have locked out of politics because they are not traditionally associated with what's palatable. Like statistics are showing that problem solving STEM-based women belong here. Women who know how to communicate from a place of problem solving and not, performance, they need us. And that's something I find deeply encouraging as a person who once myself wondered if I belonged, because I might not be as interested in the political hokey pokey as everybody else. But if you check my actual delivery and resume and results, those skills are exactly what got us from having nearly non-existent renters' rights laws in East Orange where I serve to now having a whole chapter that was amended because of the way that God has called me to do this work. And so I want women to walk away knowing that whatever it is you have is exactly what's missing because there's only one you. I know that's easier said than done, but if you can show up healthy and confident in that, it'll be easier for you to move from a shared vision and a collaborative space because you're adding only what you can add and you're not trying to do and play by the rules that people are screaming from the mountaintops are no longer working for us in politics anyway. So that's all and I hope that encourages somebody because it's encouraging me every day.
Encourage me.
Yeah. It encourages me as we're pushing back and saying, I get that you're performing, Mr. Longstanding, fill in the blank position, but your seat on the line and you better get it together or I'm gonna come take it from you. And that's something we really need to talk about in our field, that folks dancing around because they got jobs and carrying on, but you can invite me back for a part 2 if you really want to talk about that.
Brittany, we gotta get a drink, girl.
Definitely.
We gotta get a drink and talk about some things, Brittany. Um, agree, 100% agree. I think what I would say is, and it's somewhat it's related to also what Brittany said, is one, Black women should not get involved to save these people, this country, X, Y, Z. And I actually mean that. I mean that for others and I mean that for myself. And why I say it that way is because I think the case that I would make, which is similar to what Brittany said, the case that I would make for us getting involved or staying involved, and right, like it's not to go save anyone, but it's a recognition that what we have to offer can actually, right, like be the solution to our problems, right? Like, and I think that's, it may sound like a distinction without a difference, but I actually think that is different because I think there's a lot of Black women gonna save the day in whatever way. And it's like, no, 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 we're not coming to save nobody's day. We're not coming to clean up a mess, right? But we should stay and get involved because what we have, to Brittany's point, is also missing and is a vehicle, a vessel for solutions to the problem that we are facing. And so I think the case, if you are interested in becoming an elected official, if that is something you think you might be interested in, I think just, all you have to do is look at the state of our party right now, right? Like it's kind of rudderless in a way, right? Like the electorate is kind of rejecting, as much as Republicans and Trump are doing a whole ton of things that they don't like, right? Like just because they don't like that does not mean they're voting for Democrats, right? Because we have a problem where they perceive us in a certain way that is not, advantageous. Brittany said the thing about performative, right? Like, yes, they see us that way. They see the party as weak. They see the party as, in a lot of ways, contradicting itself, hypocritical, right? Like that Charlie Kirk vote is a good example, which I'm gonna point everybody to, right? Like, and so and also, right, like we're kind of playing the same game as if we're in the same place, right? Like in terms of our politics, in terms of the state of this country, in terms of the threats. And so people are looking around, right? Like it's not about our policies, it's not about that. It's about our positioning, the way we're showing up and what we're actually doing in a moment that actually calls for a lot more, right? And so if you're thinking about elected office, right, like that is the case that I would make for getting in the game, because whatever you thought about what the prescriptive formula is for what is a viable candidate and what you have to do to be a viable candidate, I can give you 20 examples of people who have defied that gravity and won, right? Like, and on the terms of money, on the terms of message, on the terms of profile, on the terms of connectivity to the district or state or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, whatever it is, I could give you 20 examples of people who have defied that, and the state of our politics is no longer the formulaic, if the most people know you and you have the most money to communicate and you have the most institutional support, therefore you are going to win. I would argue that is actually a formula to lose, right? Because the electorate is not interested in the same old, same old. We've been serving them incremental change for forever and a day, and they're like, baby, blow it up, right? Like, give me something new, give me something else. Like, that's not it. And so that is the case for newer, different, vibrant, right? Like nuanced, complex perspectives, lived experiences, right? Like that is the case for us, for you, frankly, right? So that's my, I won't call it advice. That's my argument, right? Because I think it's stronger than advice. I think the case for, if you are someone who wants to get into politics as as an operative, right? Like whether it's on the official side or on the campaign side as a campaign operative strategist, whatever it is, whatever the buckets of the work is on that side, if you want to be more of a staffer, an operative. My case for that is you should get in, because the reasons that we are where we are today is not, in my opinion, it's not singularly because of one thing. It's actually not, right? Like we saw in, what was it, 2010, 2014, the whole Tea Party backlash. This country has been the electorate has been backlashing and backlashing and backlashing. And what we're seeing now with Trump and MAGA, it's just the latest manifestation of the thing that has actually been happening for a long time. And also, we don't have real power at the state level, at the local level. We really don't, right? Like, and so we could talk about all the federal stuff, but like we actually are like bleeding like at the state level, where it's really important to have a strong political like foundation. And so if you want to be on the operative side, the case for doing that is because you're not part of the people who got us into this mess. I'm gonna just call it a spade, right? And what you have to offer is, again, I think a vessel and a vehicle for solutions, because I have found that a lot of people who work in politics, work on campaigns, work in the electoral space, they see the country and the electorate for what they want it to be and not what it is. And I also think, my experience, you can quote me on it, I believe that white people have no idea what it means to exist in contradiction, and therefore they don't understand how to resolve the contradictions in the electorate, right? Why are, Latina folks, Trump is bad on immigration, he's so aggressive, he's so dangerous. Like, why would Latino folks like vote for him? They should be voting for Democrats because he's so bad, right? Like, why would black men, trend in XY direction? 13% of them vote for Trump. Like, why would they vote for him? He's a racist, right? Like, they see these things as contradictory. And again, if you're a person who's had to move through this world where everything is kind of linear, right? Like, then I get that, right? Like, you don't know how to square that circle. But I'm a black woman, immigrant to this country, grew up on Staten Island, racism hotbed. Um, Went to a private boarding school, private white boarding school that cost too much damn money in New England, right? Like on a scholarship, which is the only reason I could afford to go, right? Like, and then went to a white private Catholic college also in New England. And just, I've always been in existing around white people, right? Like, and so I have to be everything to everyone. I have to be Kyra has to find me to be an authentic Black woman who cares about our community and cares about us and shows up in a space in a way that does not abdicate my responsibility to us, right? I also have to be the person that, white members who are maybe slightly racist, think that like, oh, you're so articulate and you're so interested, oh, you're so smart, right? Like, I got to be that. To these people, I got to be this. To the men in the business, the consultants, right? Like, I have to be this thing, and we have to be everything to kind of everyone, right? Like, and we exist in contradiction. And when you are a person who has the lived experience of existing in contradiction, when you're presented with the contradictions of the electorate, you actually understand why that is. And you understand what we can do to reconcile it. And white people just do not have that, right? Like, and that is my opinion. And so that is my case for getting in and staying in if you're also on the operative side. So that's my pitch.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
all of it. Let me give some examples of races that I think ladies should look into, that
Okay.
exude that kind of talk about this dynamic that Misa spoke about, where the electorate is kind of backlashing. And I'd go back to 2018 or even 2016 with where Detroit went with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Where this is just my work, right? Not my work, but like things that I've helped be involved in and help push along. I would do the contest between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in urban Wayne County, where the establishment just relied on the Black vote. I would do Sri Thanadar in his governor's race.
Mhm.
Um, I actually was on that race.
Mhm.
And so while people are fighting me for it now, my thing has been you ought to be having a conversation about why these people felt so left behind that they would do such a thing
There it is.
before you start talking about how I came back home from New Jersey to help undo this, because I was one of the people that y'all used to leave behind and come give us some chicken and some book bags and thought we was gonna keep playing with y'all. So, when I got a little education and little, resources, I came back and helped you understand that. So so Urban Wayne County and Flint, when it came to Street Thanadar, which is why he has now become a congressperson in under a decade, representing Detroit. So, and it's a Black city. There's that. There's Andy Kim in New Jersey. There is my race, both in the congressional and in the state assembly. There is, I encourage you all to look at Amanda, the young lady in Texas right now.
Oh, Amanda Edwards.
Edwards.
Amanda Edwards. I don't know. She's in a special election currently. And so I would encourage you all to support her from afar, send prayers, and just follow her race, because so much of this work is about understanding trends. And so much of this work is about understanding the human behavior. And also so much of this work is about studying what makes people turn or shift a certain way. And so if you are entering it from a space of inexperience, that's not a bad thing. But I'm trying to just give you some areas to start in, and looking at how what you're seeing today between the Democrats and Republicans is not a new phenomenon. It has just reached ahead.
Yeah.
And now we are all operating in a space from it reaching ahead. But those are just some small examples that I give you, so that you can see why certain places are such big focal points for national campaigns.
Wow, this was amazing. This is an amazing conversation. Also very, very good high note to end our series on, if I'm being honest. I'm really happy it like turned out this way. So thank you so much for just providing your knowledge, being able to answer any questions. I'm gonna send this video over probably next week with everything else. And then can you offline, you guys can send me like ways our supporters can find you, and I'll add that to that email. Thank you so much, y'all, for participating like every Wednesday for the last couple weeks. Thank you so much, Missayr and Brittany. This is really great. I feel more energized because I was a little burnt out, but it happens. But y'all have a wonderful night, a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, and I hope to talk to y'all again soon. Right.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.